The warm Texas breeze brushed against my face as I drove, with Jake by my side, watching the landscape pass by. The small town of Willow Creek seemed peaceful, almost magical, with its tree-lined streets and wooden houses that looked as cozy as the stories I had always heard. However, as we approached the new house, a chill ran down my spine. The house was old, with dusty windows and a porch that creaked in the wind, as if it were trying to tell us something. "Look, Sarah," Jake exclaimed, pointing excitedly at the backyard. "That tree is huge." I followed his gaze and saw the tree, an immense old figure standing out from the rest of the yard. Its twisted branches seemed to reach out toward us, as if trying to embrace us or perhaps trap us. I felt intrigued and a little uneasy. There was something strange about the way its branches leaned, as if they were watching our every move. "It's just a tree, Jake." I tried to reassure him, but my own voice sounded hesitant. "Let's explore the house first." We entered the house, and while Jake ran inside, I couldn't shake the tree from my mind. The way it rose against the orange sky of twilight gave me the impression that it held deep secrets. After a few minutes, I decided it was time to check out the backyard that so fascinated my brother. "Sarah, come here," Jake shouted, his voice echoing through the house. When I reached the backyard, he stood there, gazing at the tree with an intrigued expression. "What is it, Jake?" I asked, walking up to him. "I think I heard a whisper coming from it," he said, his eyes shining with a mix of fear and excitement. "Whispers," I repeated, trying to hide my discomfort. "You must be imagining things." But he shook his head, convinced. Night began to fall, and the moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows on the ground. I couldn't ignore the feeling that the tree was alive in some way. After a long day of moving, I finally went to my room. But as I tried to sleep, the whispers Jake mentioned began to echo in my mind. What could it be? My thoughts swirled around the strange tree and its almost hypnotic call. I got out of bed and went to the window. The darkness outside was deep, but the tree was still visible, imposing and enigmatic. I looked for a long time, waiting for any movement. That's when I noticed that even in the darkness, the branches seemed to move, almost as if they were writhing. "What do you want?" I murmured, feeling a mix of curiosity and fear. The answer came as a heavy silence, enveloping the atmosphere. The next morning, upon waking, I felt the need to understand more about that tree. While Jake distracted himself exploring the house, I decided to rummage through the attic, which had an air of mystery. I found a dusty box, and upon opening it, I came across several old photographs. One of them made me stop. It was a picture of the tree, but much younger. Beside it, there was a group of smiling children. My heart raced as I noticed that some of the children in the photo looked identical to those I had seen in posts about disappearances in an old library I had heard about. The stories of Willow Creek were filled with accounts of children who had vanished over the years, and the tree seemed to be a central figure in the narratives. "Sarah, what did you find?" Jake asked, curious, as he approached me. "Look at this, Jake." I showed him the photo. "Have you heard about these children?" He frowned, his expression growing more serious. "No, but the tree. I feel like it knows something." What I felt was a knot in my throat, a sense that we were about to enter a territory from which we could not return. What did that tree really want? And why did it seem to be calling me? The answers were hidden in the shadows, and I was determined to find them. The sun began to set, painting the sky a deep orange as I walked toward the small antique shop where Mr. Thompson used to spend his time. He was an elderly man with white hair and a scrutinizing gaze, who seemed to carry all the secrets of the town on his hunched shoulders. The thought that he might know more about the tree left me uneasy, but curiosity outweighed fear. I needed to understand. As soon as I entered the shop, the smell of aged wood and dust filled my nostrils. The place was packed with strange objects. Clocks that had stopped in time, dusty paintings, and books with worn covers. I looked around, trying to find Mr. Thompson, and soon spotted him sitting behind a counter, immersed in a book. "Mr. Thompson," I called out, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. He looked up, and for a moment, a spark of recognition crossed his face. "Ah, Sarah, the daughter of the family that moved into the treehouse. What brings you here?" His voice was hoarse but had a warm tone. I wanted to know more about the tree in my backyard. I hesitated, but urgency pushed me forward. "I've heard some stories about missing children. Do you know anything?" He slowly closed the book, as if he were guarding a secret. His eyes darkened, and he leaned forward, almost whispering. "You must keep your distance from that tree, Sarah. It's not just a tree. It's a place of pain and loss. Many children have disappeared because of it. Some people believe it feeds on innocent souls." My heart raced. His words reverberated in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something tangible and terrible was lurking. "But how is that possible?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What happened to those children?" "They were drawn to it, like moths to a flame. Once they get close, it's as if the tree calls to them." He paused, looking out the window towards my backyard. "If you hear whispers, it's better not to respond. It's a warning." A chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't help but think of Jake. He had always been so curious and naive. And if someone has already heard, what happened to them? I pressed on. "There's no going back." He shook his head, and his expression grew serious. "The townspeople tend to avoid that place, but few truly believe in what happened. Most prefer to forget." I felt increasingly distressed. When I bid farewell to Mr. Thompson, an idea began to form in my mind. If the tree had this power, I needed to know more. I had to investigate. The next morning, I decided to go to the local library. The place was small but had a cozy atmosphere, with shelves filled with books that seemed to hold stories from the past. The librarian, a gray-haired lady, greeted me with a smile. "What are you looking for, dear?" she asked. "I'm interested in books about the history of the town, especially about disappearances," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She frowned slightly, but soon led me to a less visited section where the book covers were covered in dust. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, I found some articles from old newspapers. With each line I read, my heart raced. The accounts were terrifying. Children disappearing under mysterious circumstances, all connected to the same tree. "My God!" I exclaimed aloud, drawing the librarian's attention. "What is it, my dear?" She approached, concerned. "These stories, all these children, they disappeared near the tree." I was in shock, but the librarian seemed more interested in calming me down. "They're just old stories, dear. Often, people make things up to explain the unexplainable," she said, trying to ease my anxiety. But I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that the tree was at the center of it all. As soon as I left the library, with the news weighing on my shoulders, my thoughts were on Jake. He had started dreaming about the tree. Was he being drawn to it too? What was he really hearing? That night, I couldn't sleep. The idea of spending more time near the tree began to turn into an obsession. I needed to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing whatever was lurking in the shadows. The decision was made. I would spend the night in the yard, watching the tree and trying to unravel its mysteries. The darkness of the night enveloped the house like a heavy cloak, and I felt small and vulnerable as I sat in the yard, observing that eerie tree that seemed to lean closer and closer in my direction. My heart raced in a frantic rhythm, and a feeling that something was about to happen sent chills down my spine. Jake, my younger brother, had settled into a corner, wrapped in his blanket, but I knew he could feel the tension in the air too. "Sarah, do you really want to stay out here all night?" he asked, his voice trembling as he looked at the tree with a mix of fear and curiosity. We need to find out what's going on, Jake. I can't just ignore the whispers I heard. And those objects I found, they belong to missing children. We need to understand this. I tried to sound firm, but the uncertainty in my heart threatened to show in my words. He took a deep breath, as if he wanted to protest, but he just shook his head, resigned. Okay, but if something happens, you promise we'll leave? I promise, I said, although I knew the promise sounded fragile against what I felt. The tree loomed in silhouette. Its leaves seemed to whisper my name, and every movement it made unsettled me. As the hours passed, the night grew denser, and the feeling of presence around me intensified. I looked at Jake, who had already closed his eyes, but his face was contorted in a nightmare I couldn't understand. "Jake," I whispered, but he didn't respond. Instead, the tree seemed to be calling for him. A shadow moved beside me, and I turned quickly, almost knocking over the lantern we had brought. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness of the night. But there was no answer, only the whisper of the wind through the leaves. My heart raced as I saw something writhing in the roots of the tree. It was as if they were stretching, searching for something. "Jake!" I shouted again, but he remained lost in his restless sleep. "Wake up! Look at me!" Suddenly, a soft, almost childlike voice emerged from the darkness. "Sarah, bring someone to us." It was a familiar voice, but I couldn't comprehend where it was coming from. That phrase echoed in my mind, rooting itself like a seed of dread. "Jake, did you hear that?" I asked, but he didn't move. The presence around me felt more intense, and a wave of despair washed over me. I looked back at the tree, and in the light of the lantern, the shadows danced in a hypnotic way. Something was there, hidden among the roots. Determined not to succumb to panic, I stood up and approached the tree. The smell of damp earth and something sweet, almost sickening, invaded my nose. With each step, a growing anxiety accompanied me. What had really happened to those children? What did the tree want from me? When I got closer, something glinted in the light of the lantern. My eyes widened as I saw small objects, toys, bracelets, and even a sketchbook, all buried among the roots of the tree. My stomach tightened. "No, it can't be," I murmured as the truth unfolded before me. That tree wasn't just a tree. It was a graveyard, a repository of lost memories and unlived lives. "Sarah, are you okay?" Jake's voice brought me back to reality. He had woken up, now looking at me with a mix of concern and fear. "Jake, you won't believe what I found." My voice faltered, and I couldn't continue. With a gesture, I showed him the objects. He leaned closer, eyes wide. "What is this? Where did it come from?" "They're things from children who disappeared, and they're all here buried," I said, my voice trembling. "The tree, it's involved in all of this." He looked at the tree, then back at me, and a look of understanding formed on his face. "Sarah, do you think it? Is she asking for something?" Those words echoed in my mind, and the sense of urgency grew. Maybe, but what could it be? A shiver ran down my spine, and the idea that something evil was waiting for us left me cold. "Let's talk to Mr. Thompson," Jake suggested, his voice firm. "He might know what to do." With a nod, I agreed. That place was turning into a nightmare, and the only way out I saw was to seek help. But as we moved away from the tree, a feeling that we weren't alone accompanied me, as if something was watching us, waiting. My heart raced in my chest as I approached Mr. Thompson, who was sitting in his rocking chair, staring out the window as if he were waiting for a sign. I knew what he had to say was important, but the anticipation made me restless. "Sarah," he began, his voice hoarse and tired, "the tree is not what it seems. It is a portal to a dark world, and it feeds on innocent souls." My hands trembled as I tried to absorb his words. But why? Why this tree? Why the children? The question escaped me, laden with desperation. The old man sighed, his expression heavy with sadness. It feeds on fear, on innocence. Every child that disappears is a feast for it. The town hasn't noticed, but the tree has always been here, like a shadow waiting. Hearing this, my stomach churned. Jake, my brother. He was getting involved with the tree, and I didn't know how deep that involvement was. And what can we do? How can we stop it? My voice trembled, but I needed answers. There is a ritual, he replied, looking down at the ground. But you must be aware that performing this ritual may have terrible consequences, especially for those close to the tree. I felt a chill run down my spine at the thought of Jake. The idea that he could be the target made me feel nauseous. I can't let that happen. What do I need to do? He looked me in the eyes, and for a moment, I saw the pain reflected in his gaze. You need an object that holds deep meaning for you or for Jake. Something you can sacrifice to appease the tree. But remember, this could affect both of your lives. Those words hung in the air, heavy as lead. What would I be willing to sacrifice to save my brother? The thought of losing Jake terrified me. I will do whatever it takes, I declared, determined. I can't let the tree take another child. Night fell, and the atmosphere around us felt denser. With a heavy heart, I returned home, determined to prepare the ritual. The backyard was shrouded in shadows, and the tree loomed large, like a monster waiting for its prey. The wind whispered through the branches, and the feeling of being watched grew with every step I took. Jake, I called, my voice echoing in the darkness. Jake, are you there? Silence was the only answer. Throughout the night, fear began to mix with determination. I set up a small table with things that could help with the ritual. An old photo of us, a bracelet he used to wear, and finally, a small stone I had found in the yard, which always reminded me of happy childhood moments. When the moon was high in the sky, I decided it was time to face the tree and perform the ritual. Mr. Thompson, I called, hoping he would join me, but he had vanished as if he had never been there. Loneliness settled in me, and fear grew like a monster inside my chest. Approaching the tree, I felt a pressure in the air, as if it were alive. You will not take Jake, I shouted, anger and desperation mixing in my words. I won't let you. The tree trembled, and the wind began to blow harder, as if responding to my declaration. With my heart in my throat, I held Jake's bracelet, trying to gather courage. If you are listening to me, I am here to make a deal. I offer this, I said, raising the bracelet. In exchange, you will release my brother. Nothing happened. The silence was deafening. Fear enveloped me, but I knew I couldn't back down now. In a moment of desperation, I let the bracelet fall to the ground, and a feeling of loss washed over me. Please, Jake, where are you? It was then that I heard a sound, a distant whisper, as if the tree itself were trying to communicate. My heart raced in my chest as I looked at the branches, which moved slowly, as if they were reaching out to me, swallowing my scream of despair. Jake! I cried out again, but the response I received was a deep, penetrating silence. It was at that moment I realized the tree was not just an object of terror, but something even more malevolent, a force that could wield power over lives and destinies. And I was at the center of it all, fighting to rescue my brother from a dark fate. Panic overtook me as I ran toward the tree, my heart pounding irregularly in my chest. Jake! I shouted, my voice nearly lost in the wind that seemed to whisper dark secrets. The tree's roots twisted like living snakes, and I could feel the evil presence intensifying as I approached. The atmosphere was charged, as if the very air was waiting for something terrible. Jake! I continued to call, but the only echo that returned was my own despair. The darkness around me seemed to close in, and a chilling breeze wrapped around me, as if the tree were drawing me into its deadly embrace. What could I do? The memory of what Mr. Thompson had said echoed in my mind. The tree feeds on innocent souls. And now my brother was in danger. Suddenly, a vision struck me like lightning. I remembered an old legend that Jake's grandfather used to tell about a heart that needed to be offered to the tree to appease it. What did that mean? What could I sacrifice? I looked at my necklace, a gift from our mother, and hesitated. It was too precious, but Jake's life was at stake. Please no. A familiar voice cut through my thoughts. It was him, Jake, who appeared abruptly from the shadows, but something was wrong. His eyes were empty, devoid of the essence of the person I knew. Jake! I shouted, running toward him. What happened to you? He simply stared at me, with a smile that wasn't his. She called me Sarah. The tree spoke to me. The voice that came from his lips lacked the softness it used to have. It was as if another entity were controlling his being. She said, I'm special. No, Jake. You can't believe that. I stepped closer, determined to rescue my brother. You need to come back to me. The desperation in my voice seemed to have no effect. The roots twisted faster, as if the tree were feeding off our anguish. You don't understand, Sarah. I'm part of her now. She showed me things, gave me power. His empty eyes reflected the darkness of the tree, and my heart broke as I realized the connection between them was stronger than I could have imagined. She just wants a heart to be at peace. No, you can't do this. I screamed, desperate. You're my brother, Jake. Remember who you are. Remember us. I tried to appeal to his memory, to those happy moments we shared. Remember our birthday, the day we rescued that abandoned puppy. Remember how you promised you would always be by my side. He hesitated for a moment, and I caught a glimpse of a small spark of recognition in his eyes. But soon the empty expression returned, and the entity within him seemed to laugh. She's waiting, Sarah. You can't stop her. I won't give up on you, Jake. I shouted, feeling hope slipping away. The tree began to stir, as if it were getting irritated with our conversation. I'll do anything to bring you back. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and the roots began to rise, threatening to bind me. With a desperate impulse, I remembered the necklace. If I offer my heart, you can come back. You can be free. The idea was crazy, but I was willing to try. The love I felt for him was all I had. Don't do this, Sarah. Jake shouted, but there was a fragility in his voice. You don't know what's going to happen. The roots drew closer, and I knew time was running out. What do I do, Jake? How can I save you? The question slipped from my lips, not as a request, but as a plea. I don't know. He hesitated, and the shadow surrounding him seemed to stir. The tree, it's stronger than you think. The echoes of children's laughter began to haunt the air, and despair took hold of me. The feeling that something was about to happen intensified, and I realized that the battle for Jake's soul was just beginning. The atmosphere around me felt charged with an oppressive energy, and the tree writhed with a fury I had never seen before. The wind picked up, making the branches sway violently, as if trying to push me away. I needed to focus on Jake. I needed to find a way to bring him back. I looked into his eyes, which were now empty, as if a shadow had overtaken his soul. Jake! I shouted, my voice echoing in the darkness. Remember us. Remember our last birthday together. Do you remember the cake I made? And how you laughed when the frosting fell on your nose? There was no response, only the sound of the wind and the whispering leaves, which seemed to move in a macabre dance. You need to come back. It's not you that's here. I continued, desperately trying to reach the brother I knew. You're stronger than this. Fight against whatever is controlling you. But instead, the entity within him began to manifest, its voice echoing with a deep, distant tone. She can't take me out of you, Sarah. He is mine now. He always was. I waited so long for a pure soul like his. Those words cut through me like a knife. It was as if the tree had taken complete control, and I was seeing Jake only as an empty shell. No, it can't be. Jake, can you hear me? You are my brother. You are more than this. I needed a connection, a sign that he was still there. And then, in a flicker of hope, I saw a fraction of emotion pass through his eyes. Sarah. His voice was weak, almost a whisper. Help me. I'm here, Jake. I won't let you go. I held his hands, trying to convey all the strength and love I had. Whatever was inside him was fighting against my plea, but I wouldn't give up. The ritual I had learned from Mr. Thompson began to echo in my mind. We needed a pure heart, and I knew I could be that heart if it meant saving Jake. I will do whatever it takes, I shouted at the tree, as the roots seemed to writhe like furious serpents. You won't take my brother. He is stronger than you. The tree responded with a deep tremor, and I felt a wave of energy pulse through the ground beneath my feet. You don't understand, Sarah. The cycle will never end. More children will come, and more hearts will be offered. That's how life works. The entity's voice was like an echo, reverberating in my gut. The laughter of lost children began to echo within the tree, a cacophony of voices that made me feel nauseous. It was as if I were in a nightmare, and the reality around me was crumbling. Jake, stay with me. You are more than this. You are my brother, and we have always had each other. And at that moment, something within Jake seemed to stir. He began to scream, not in the voice of the entity, but as my brother. Sarah, I'm trapped. I'm here. Fight it. Fight against the tree. I could feel the roots closing in, almost as if they were seeking to trap me too. You are not alone, Jake. I will bring you back. But the entity within him manifested again, and the voice became even more threatening. You cannot save him. He is already mine, and now you will be too. The roots began to move toward me, and I knew I needed to act fast. Jake, listen. If you love me, if you are still my brother, then fight. Fight for us.